We start with this. After this week's jaw-dropping testimony at the state capture inquiry, the ANC's attempt to sell itself as a party tough on corruption suffered another blow. Former Bosassa COO Angelo Agrizzi has laid bare how the security company paid cash bribes for government contracts.
The use of cash was from the safe, was used predominantly for illegal activities.
In short, bribes, as you've described it.
Correct.
The use of the grey security bags
was used to pack the cash in that was used for bribes.
Agrizzi told the Zondo Commission it was this cash that placed senior politicians in the company's pocket.
I can't count all the contracts in the back of my head now, but what I can tell you is it was every single contract.
Yes.
Either way, every single contract was tainted with bribes and corruption.
The stink around Bosassa cash is nothing new. President Cyril Ramaphosa was forced to concede late last year that 500,000 rand was paid as a donation from Bosassa to his ANC election campaign.
In my own heart of hearts, I have no doubt whatsoever on my part, there's been no corruption about this. If there was, I would own up. Now, what I said in Parliament has been interpreted as me having lied. And as soon as I realized what the real truth was, I wrote to Parliament and I said, I actually gave incorrect information. And that is not the behavior of a liar, as far as I'm concerned, because I went forward and disclosed.
So where does this leave the ANC's anti-corruption message? Political analyst Ibrahim Fakir joins us in studio, and Adrian Basson is on Skype in Cape Town. Andy Rice, brand guru, alongside Ibrahim here in studio. Just to let you know, the ANC was invited to join this conversation, but chose to concentrate on their NEC meeting currently underway. I'll start with the politics of this all. Ibrahim, Cyril Ramaphosa came to power on the back of an anti-corruption ticket. Where does this leave that message and the ANC's attempt to cast itself as squeaky clean?
Well, where it's always left the message, somewhere in tatters. Because clearly the pious pronouncements are in complete contradiction to the actual actions and the behavior of ANC members. Now, no matter how much credence you'd want to give to Cyril Ramaphosa's campaign, the trouble is that he is deeply embedded in a party which is so completely compromised by all of this that it leaves the message, as I said, in tatters. But there's a deeper structural problem, Nick, and that's something we're not focusing on. That this is about the actual broad policy trajectory and a peculiar brand and type of crony capitalism which seems to operate in South Africa. Now, crony capitalism is obviously a problem everywhere, but in this peculiar instance, it's not just a cozy relationship between business people and government or people in government or politicians. It is about the actual compromise through corrupt means of actually paying things like bribes, inflating prices. And that fits squarely and neatly into this whole neoliberal paradigm which was chosen, where you start subcontracting, outsourcing and contracting functions of the state elsewhere. And when you've got this combination of crony capitalists and cozy relationships with politicians, and you've got this neoliberal trajectory, it obviously opens up the space for all this kinds of nonsense.
Adrian, I'm going to bring you in on the Skype line from Cape Town. You've been writing about this for a decade. Do you feel vindicated as well as annoyed?
I think that's a good way to summarize it, Nicholas. I am happy that it's finally getting this kind of big stage. I've always believed Bosassa is a much bigger story than what it's been given credence to. But I'm very annoyed that this evidence, firstly, is not given in a court of law, wasn't given in a court of law many years ago. You know, someone like Agrizzi was playing along for many years. He's now decided to turn against them. And this case should have been processed by our law enforcement agencies many years ago. The SIU report, which was very thorough and had evidence of corruption, was handed to the NPA a decade ago exactly, and nothing has happened. So this also shows you the price of a captured law enforcement agency and NPA, and the price that has on the body politic and on civil society and on the citizens of a country when corruption is allowed to continue unabated.
So we'll come back to the political aspect of a new MPA head starting in a few weeks' time, but We're in an election year, and Andy Rice, brand is important when we try and convince citizens to vote for us. So how is the ANC going to be able to sell a message of cleaning up house when it seems as though the rot on the ANC brand has just been further embedded?
Yeah, certainly recent events would not be helpful in the forthcoming election period. But I think we need to understand that a brand has two components. It has a rational and an emotional component. And the balance between the two is very important. The emotional component is much more enduring, much more sustainable, much more influential. Now, what I mean by that is that there are the facts and the figures that the ANC might want to claim as part of its achievements. You know, a brand is a promise made and a promise kept. Now, a promise is easy to make, as every election manifesto will show. Keeping it is less easy. Now, on the assumption that all political parties fail to a greater or lesser extent to keep their promises, how will this influence the way that people view the ANC? They may be much more influenced by the nuts and bolts of the stories that are coming out and driving them away from being loyal to the ANC, or they might be saying, actually, it's the emotional component, the legacy, the history, the achievements, everything the ANC has done for achieving democracy in this country is more important. And I would suggest that that is definitely the more important component. If I may look at two other examples recently where we've had the same dilemma. We have the Trump election in the States, and we have the Brexit referendum in the UK. In both cases, the parties that lost, Clinton and the Remainers, lost primarily because they failed to understand the emotional component of the messaging they had to get across. So Hillary Clinton's campaign was all about numbers and pie charts and progressive things, and it was all about detail and data and fact.
But it didn't strike a chord with the motion.
Exactly. Trump stood up and said, let's make America great again. Now, it's very easy to see which way that would work. Same happened in Brexit. We want to regain control of our country versus, again, a panoply of data and information. And that emotional component is still on the side of the ANC for many, many people in this country.
Ibrahim, politically speaking, I mean, we've got a new MPA head, Shamila Batoyi, starting in a couple of weeks' time. Are we being wishful in our thinking that she may bring in a new reign on the MPA, and we could see a complete turnaround when it comes to things like Bosassa, which was a case that the MPA has just been sitting on for a decade?
Well, it has been, but the reality here is, again, you're going to have a strong figurehead, like you do in the political arena with Cyril Ramaphosa. But here you've got a person who's got efficiency, who's got effectiveness, who've got experience, all on her side. The problem is that she will now be leading an institution which has not only been hollowed out, but who have key individuals, investigators, prosecutors, who themselves have, to use a colloquial term, captured. And so she's now presiding over an institution which is not only hollowed out, but also deeply compromised. So she might have the best intentions to bring these issues not just to the fore, but actually before court. The reality is she going to have the investigative capacity, the information and the facts, and all of this to be able to successally prosecute?
More importantly, is she going to have the political cover to do exactly that? Cyril Ramaphosa saying, playing a very good game by talking, but actually allowing the MPA to have unfettered access to prosecute senior politicians?
Look, I think on the basis of what he's promised, it is likely that he is going to himself want to provide that cover. The problem is, will the ANC allow him to do so? Because the factional trade, horse trading that's happening inside the ANC, he might well find himself constrained despite his own best efforts to want to provide the cover. So it's not about the individual. It's going to be about the nature of this party and what this party is going to allow him to be able to do in order to recover not just their brand legacy. Because I think Mr. Rice is correct. There is the emotional component. That's true. But South African voters are moving away, and you can see that over the last two elections. There is a much more rational component, which often sits side by side with the emotional attachment to party loyalty or to brand loyalty. And so when you start having a much more instrumental calculus on the part of voters, this stuff starts to matter, particularly where you see institutions don't carry out the mandate, and they don't carry out their mandate because they are being held hostage by politicians.
Mr. Rice, to close out the conversation then, can the ANC rely one last time on their struggle credentials in this election? Is this the last time that they can do it, or would they already be in very choppy waters to do so come May when we go to the ballot box?
Well, they're going to rely on them to some extent. It's such a legacy that they'd be mad to discard it. But every election, a new generation is coming through for whom the struggle is no longer something they were part of, but something they know about from their parents and from earlier generations. So it's being diluted election by election, and the question is, when will that dilution get to the point where they lose absolute power?
Well, tough to leave that engaging conversation. We are going to continue with politics coming up next. Why did the DA think it was a good idea to use the names of the victims of Marikana and Life Esidimeni tragedies in their electioneering campaign? We find out as Makashule Ghana joins us alongside Andy Rice and Ibrahim Fakir.